So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Recovery and Renewal webinar. I hope you're all well. I would have loved to have been able to say hello to you all individually as you joined, but there were just too many of you. Fantastic turnout to today's webinar. Almost 80 people registered altogether, which is brilliant. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Jools Townsend. I'm Chief Executive of the Community Rail Network. I'll be hosting today's webinar, ably assisted by Hazel and Hannah, our events team. Before we start, I want to acknowledge the very sad news reports that have been coming in the last few hours, which I'm sure most of you will have picked up on. To do with the train derailment in Scotland, in Stonehaven. So I'm sure you'll join me in sending thoughts and well wishes to everyone who's been directly involved in that incident and who is dealing with the aftermath. However, we felt it appropriate to proceed, and I'm sure we will still have a very constructive and positive discussion around Community Rail's important role in recovery, the recovery of our communities and our railways today. So this is a little bit different to the previous webinars that we've been running in the last few months, for those of you who have joined those. We're making a bit more time to hear from all of you. So we will be hearing from a few speakers who you can hopefully see lined up in the panel at the top. Including some senior partners from rail and government and some excellent community rail examples. But we will all be trying to keep it quite brief, even me, to leave plenty of time for you to share your thoughts and ideas and experiences. We'll be looking at three broad areas that we've identified as important ways that community rail can make a crucial contribution to COVID recovery. Building local understanding and dialogue is the first. The second, inclusion, well-being and resilience. And the third is positivity, confidence and promoting rail travel. So for each of those three topics, we will have 2 5-minute presentations and then 15 minutes for you to put your hands up and input or to use the chat function. And we'll be using your contributions today and anything else that you send to us or send through afterwards to review and renew our briefing for partners and government on community rail and recovery. And that's to help us champion community rail and reinforce its great importance over the months and years ahead. So to help you get the best from this webinar, just a few practicalities. Firstly, this is being recorded, so it will be all made available afterwards via our website and our YouTube channel, along with the slides. Your cameras are automatically switched off for the whole thing, and your microphone is muted to help prevent background noise. But if we do come to you to speak, you will be unmuted by a member of the team. So trying to make things as simple and straightforward as possible. Your camera will remain off though. So if like me, you failed to do your hair today, there's no worries there. The chat button is at the bottom of your screen. If you click it, the chat box will open. Feel free to put any comments or ideas in there as we go along, setting it to be visible to everyone. And our team will monitor it and we might flag up particular comments or queries as relevant as we go through. We'll also save the chat so we can refer back to it afterwards. During the discussion sessions, you'll be given a chance to input using the raise hand button, which you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. We'll let you know if we're coming to you and inviting you to speak. Please do bear in mind that if lots of people have got their hands up, but we will do our utmost to come to you in order. We will prioritise that haven't spoken already. But if you don't get a chance to say what you're wanting to, please use the chat or let the team know afterwards, or you can also use the feedback form to put in any comments at the end. If we do come to you to speak, of course, say who you are, your name, your group or organisation name, and please do try to keep it brief. Under a minute or two per comment will help us to share around the airtime. if you do have a technical issue at any point, you can text my colleague Hannah with your name, and she will ring you back when possible and try to help you if she can. Her number is in the joining instructions you were sent. And finally, at the end of the webinar, a feedback survey should magically appear in your browser, and we'd really appreciate you filling that in. So I hope that all makes sense, and I'm really pleased to hand you over now to Richard Birmingham, Chair of Community Rail Network, who's going to say a few words to set.
I knew that was going to happen. That's Murphy's Law. Let's put this here. Collapse of system. Thanks, Jules, and good afternoon and welcome to everybody. Thanks to our panellists. Thanks to all of you for joining us for this webinar on this very important topic. Well, it's a very hot Plymouth down here. I'm sure it's hot around the country as well. For me, one word encapsulates everything we do in community rail, and that word is focus. Everything we do, whatever we do, volunteers and people who are employed in community rail and people who work with people who are employed in community rail, focuses on the very local. It focuses on the local community. It focuses on making the railway as attractive, useful and relevant to local people as possible. And this has been over a sustained period too. Relationships and contacts built up over months and years and a long record of local activity all over the country. Continuing and building on this is more important than ever now. And that's obviously going to be a big theme of what we'll be talking about over the next hour and a half. Me, I'm the manager of the Devon and Cornwall Rail Partnership. Devon and Cornwall Rail Partnership were one of the founding members of what soon became afterwards ACORP and is now the Community Rail Network. We're staunch supporters of the organisation, have always been, and the reason why we've been for all these years is because its main activity is this really. It's sharing information, experience and ideas and getting people who work in and with community rail talking to each other and learning from each other. I hope you find this afternoon informative and I hope you find it inspiring as well. And with that, I'll hand back to Jules.
Thank you, Richard. Fantastic. Bit of scene setting there. Wonderful. So before we move on to looking at our first theme, I'm pleased to say we've also got a late addition to the agenda. A short video from Peter Wilkinson at the DFT, who I was having a catch up with the other day, and he was really keen to offer up some thoughts to today's webinar. So I should just say this film was made prior to this morning's events, but here are some thoughts from Peter.
Hi Jules, it's Peter Wilkinson at the department. I'm sending this message to you and all of your colleagues at the Community Rail Network. I wish for you to have a fantastic webinar event this week. I'm really sorry I can't be at it, but I just wanted to send a message to say how incredibly important the work that Community Rail does is to the department, to government, to passengers, to the rail industry, and everybody who touches and sees what you do. It's a hugely important contribution, and community rail partnerships remain very much at the heart of the railway family. The really big challenge we've got ahead, of course, in this awful coronavirus time is to try and help restore public confidence in travelling on the railway. We need every ounce of effort that we can squeeze out of every part of the rail industry to come together and work together like a family and help restore public faith in travelling on trains as being a comparatively safe way to travel still, and a much improved experience actually. We've made a lot of changes in the coronavirus period. We've made the system an awful lot cleaner, and we will continue to keep it much, much cleaner, hygienically clean, in fact, than we ever did before. And of course, we have many more staff out on the system, and police and security helping us manage social distancing. So we would really ask that Community Rail think a little bit about how the partnerships out there could just help us with the message and encouraging people to dip their toe in the water again and come back and use rail and notice, hopefully, the differences that we've made. So many people now, for example, don't need to handle cash, don't need to touch a touch screen on a ticketing machine, or fear queuing at booking offices, because we've made so much of our ticketing smart now. You can either use a smart card or have your ticket on your phone. And we continue to make strident efforts to make the timetable more resilient, so there's less risk of people getting delayed or stuck on trains, or worse, seeing people queuing and bunching up on platforms waiting for delayed trains. So a lot of work's being done by the industry, and it would be great if I could invite colleagues in Community Rail to have a bit of a think about possibly how the sort of contribution that Community Rail could make in just helping us get the message out to the public. Please come back and give rail a bit of a try, and don't be afraid to do so. Anyway, look, have a great webinar event, and all my best regards, and stay safe, everybody, and I really hope to see you all again soon. Bye now.
So massive thanks to Peter for contributing that video. I'm sure those sentiments are appreciated by everyone, and particularly the points about us working together with our railway family colleagues. Right, we're going to crack straight on with our first theme now, on building local understanding and dialogue, for which I am handing over to myself, which should in theory be a seamless transition, but we'll see. So I've just got a few slides to share, which hopefully this will work. Hope everyone can see that.
Yes, Jools, we can.
Oh, thank you, Hazel. Thanks. I was looking for some reassurance there. Right. Hopefully you all know who I am and caught my intro at the start. This is me. I mentioned earlier that we've been looking at this topic of Community Rail's role in recovery for a couple of months now. Our initial take on this was to identify these three key areas where we felt Community Rail could play a really important role in the recovery and renewal of both our communities and our railways. We were very much in coming up with those three themes, drawing on your examples and drawing on what was happening already in Community Rail. But we're hoping to use today's discussion, as I said earlier, to renew and refresh our thinking and our understanding of where we are and where we go from here. We're going to look first of all at the first of those themes. Before we start drilling down into that, and before I say a few introductory words on that theme, I wanted to acknowledge briefly that we completely appreciate how incredibly challenging the last few months have been. Really unsettling at times. I think we've all had ups and downs. Some people have faced particular issues around their individual circumstances. And of course, we appreciate that it's been a complex picture with lots of variations between different localities. We're continuing to see that now. Some variations between England, Wales and Scotland. So we very much acknowledge that, as always, what we're discussing today won't apply to you all in exactly the same ways. It's about us applying this in ways that are appropriate at a local level. But we acknowledge too that COVID has brought some opportunities, perhaps some silver linings in and amongst the turmoil. Some new opportunities have opened up. And I hope this discussion will help us to think about grasping those opportunities as much as managing the challenges ahead. And I think there's a great deal for us to be hopeful about too, within Community Rail and generally. I think it's been really noticeable, the amount of attention to this idea of building back better and greener and fairer, which absolutely resonates with what we do in Community Rail. Community Rail has also very much shown its adaptability. We've been endlessly impressed with what you've all been doing, and we're hearing some wonderful examples on this webinar today. I think that all shows, really underlines that Community Rail has never been more important than it is now. And I think really central to that is this theme of building local understanding and dialogue. And I think that's at the heart of what Community Rail does normally, facilitating positive interaction between communities and railways, drawing on local knowledge, insights and connections. But that seems to be especially important in this extremely turbulent situation that we're in now. You know, essentially we've got to keep talking to each other, picking up on a point that Richard made. We've noticed that it's been really appreciated where Community Rail has been feeding in local insights, local knowledge to partners within rail, to local authorities and others, using connections with local schools, colleges, businesses to understand how things are changing and what's needed now, to look at local travel patterns and what local people are thinking and feeling. Also feeding back out to the community obviously continues to be really important on what's going on within the railways, transport and travel generally, and we're talking more about that later. This is all about two-way communications, having conversations and aiding attention to local needs, again, fitting with the points that Richard made a second ago. So just at a very broad level, some suggestions from us on what seems to be important. We think it's really essential that we all recognise the scale of the change that we've seen already, but also that change is going to be ongoing, and in months ahead are going to continue to be turbulent. But there are new possibilities emerging from that, and perhaps in accepting that, you know, things aren't going to go back to exactly how they were before, and there's further change to come. It's especially important that we have a positive long-term vision and we're clear about where we're heading long-term. We can be facilitators and connectors. Again, I think that's often what Community Rail does best, and we can help our partners to talk to each other. We can really make the most of existing local links, but I think we can also forge new ones. I think we shouldn't be afraid to reach out to new groups and partners at this time who might appreciate the additional support and understanding. We need to make sure our communications are two-way, and we have mechanisms in place for listening, understanding, and feeding through insights nimbly. You know, I think this is all about asking questions, understanding where people are now, building up understanding, and putting those local needs right at the forefront. And I think that can form a really strong foundation for positivity and renewal. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to now hand you over for a look at what Sussex CRP have been doing in relation to this theme, to Fiona Morton, who's Community Rail Development Manager there.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone can see the slides. Thanks ever so much for inviting us to take part in this. And really what we're going to talk about is a lot of the things that I'm sure many other people are doing around the country. What's particularly useful about the way that Sussex, or as we're now called, South East Communities Rail Partnership, are called, is we have a stakeholder advisory board So twice a year we're able to meet and talk about strategic overview of a lot of things. And one of the things was, how do we respond to this crisis? A lot of it was focused on, well, how do we get people back into rail use again? And the other part of it was about talking about how we support schools and children and students returning to school during this time. And this is really what we're going to focus on this afternoon. So we've got 8 community rail lines in the South East Community Rail Partnership, and rail officers to support the work. We also have a Go Learn programme, which is funded separately, and then an Active Access for Growth programme, which is, comes to us through East Sussex County Council. Yep.
Yeah, it's not moving on at the moment.
No, just give me a moment. Could you move it on for me?
I can't. I would have to take control. Let me. You can, if you give me remote control, but I'm not sure that will make any difference, Fiona.
Oh, here we are.
We're on.
Right. Okay, so the most important thing is about access is how we're working with schools. As you know, the Scottish schools have returned yesterday and today, so it'll be really worth keeping a close eye on how they've managed their arrangements in terms of travel arrangements going to school. What we're really fortunate about is that we have a very long established relationships with our schools, and that has taken quite a few years to build up. And it's mainly due to our Go Learn programme, which is run by Maddie Mills, who I'm sure a lot of you know already. It's a team effort, and it's sort of paying dividends, because we were quickly able to sort of have an overview as to, well, what's happening, what's likely to happen, what do we need to be thinking about. So the Go Learn programme is aimed at Year 6 children, and it gives us a good reach into schools. So for example, that programme, which last year, there was nearly 9,000 children accessing the programme through sort of workshops.
Fiona, can I ask you to stay close to your microphone, because you're kind of coming in and out as you lean back and forth.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So in workshops and schools, there was 1,300 children nearly participated actually within the school, and then on top of that we had 430 pupils attending stations and taking part in sort of train rides and what have you. Obviously that has been a bit of a problem due to sort of having to quickly adapt to doing things online. So we had to, obviously it wasn't safe for our education officer to be visiting schools between March and July. So we took the view that we would do whatever we could really to sort of support schools and keep them in touch with what's going on. So we put a lot of our work online, and that was really quite important, and then developed some new programs as well, particularly taking up sustainability issues. That's not part of the national curriculum in a very direct sense, but there is a link through that, which we're trying to sort of use a little bit more. So we're trying to use different platforms. I think we've all had lots of debates about what's more acceptable, Zoom, Teams, or all the new ones that are coming on. And then we're trying to make a film about what it's like to visit a station. So even if as we go forward, if we have to go into lockdown again, we've still got materials. But it's also been taken advantage of what Community Rail Network offer us as well. So the education group has proved to be very, very useful for getting people together and sharing good practice. The other programme that I mentioned is the Department for Transit Access Fund. Now this is a fund that is available in England and Wales, but is targeted at the most deprived communities. So in Sussex we have our coastal strip follows into that, it falls into that category. So we were able to sort of be part of that programme. what I'd want everyone really, I guess, to sort of pay attention to now is that this programme is likely to be extended come March. So keep an eye on this, the DFT Access Fund website, and encourage your local authority or whatever partners that you have to look at this, because it's looking at active travel in the round, and that's really quite useful. This is a slide that really tells you what it's all about. I'm not going to go into that in great detail, but I'm going to move on to what we have been doing down in the southeast. So really it's about getting as many people, as many students as possible to start thinking about active travel arrangements. So there's a whole range of things in terms of travel training, looking at cycling, looking at walking to school. We don't have to do all of that. We play our role in that, but because we've got so many partners involved in it, such as Beat the Streets and what have you, they do a lot of the work on this. So it really is worth getting involved in this. But don't forget about buses, because we often sort of forget about that aspect of it, and the connectivity, the sort of first and last mile. That's particularly important to us because one of our most deprived communities doesn't have access to a rail station at all. So we need to sort of make sure you're looking at that in the round. Okay. So in particular, this is really what we've been doing. So the focus has been on schools, trying to persuade people that they don't need to do the school run by car, particularly looking at some of the changes that local councils will be making in terms of closing streets to stop congestion as we move forward, and just giving people information that actually what you could do is this, or there's this route which isn't along the main road, and just sort of supporting as much of that as possible. So for more detailed information, Catherine Simmons is our lead officer on this, and these are her details here. Obviously, we've had to adapt it considerably due to the COVID-19, but we've sort of met virtually, pooled ideas, thought about different ways of doing it. And the programme has actually been able to continue. And one of the more successful aspects has been getting electric bikes or bicycles to key workers. And we've been able to, and some of the rail companies have been doing that as well. The most important thing really was about sort of sharing information, and people don't automatically think about the community rail partnership when it comes to schools, because the focus has really been on in-classroom safety and about results and all those sort of things that have been going on. And really what we were able to do, I think, is to sort of try and make sure that we started that conversation early on. So we took a bit of a proactive report and sort of said, right, okay, the schools are closed now, but they are going to reopen, and we need to start thinking now about how that can be managed. I mean, it's particularly sort of pinch points. For example, in Farnborough North, there's a school that has 5,000 students. We were looking at timetabling concerns as to, well, how do you timetable the trains, especially if there's an extra train planned? How do we stop congestion in waiting rooms? And do the rail companies have an idea of how long it takes to walk from school to the train station, and how all that could be effectively managed? So some of the train operating companies are really on the front foot of that. And of course, some of our other ones needed a little bit of encouragement to start thinking through what that would actually mean. But also in terms of the long term as well, these are tomorrow's customers. And this is how they're going to be connected to the railway. If no one's thinking about their particular needs at this stage, it doesn't encourage them to continue later on. But it's also about guiding the train operators. and just thinking about all of these issues and just facilitating contact. I mean, a lot of our key stakeholders are the travel officers, the transport officers within county councils. So that was really important because they needed to talk to each other, and it was just a question of putting people in touch with their opposite number and thinking through these things. But it's also the message that seemed to go down best was about confidence about travelling and about the hygiene measures that a lot of the train operating companies were doing, and indeed the bus companies, so that people felt as if, well, if they didn't have any, if they had concerns about it, at least they had facts and information that they could make a good judgment about their own individual sort of circumstances. And it was just
Fiona, just to give you a quick warning, because we're overrunning a bit. Would you mind just a 1 minute warning?
Yeah,
thank
I'm
you.
Coming to the end. So it's about making the use of what was around, and the county council has its virtual school bag. So we were able to get information in there about what was actually happening about school transport. So that was quite important. So the key messages really was this, is that there's lots of active travel options, especially through our existing programme. We offered to work with schools to solve their sort of congestion problems. And also it was just really, as I said before, is about, you know, well, actually talking about the hygiene measures and what is happening. And then also it's about just local arrangements. What actually is there on the ground and what options are there? Because people don't want to return to car use in ways before, and there are other options. My final plea really is this is the slide that we always go to when we're talking about sustainable travel. And you can see what's missing from that slide. And there isn't a train there. It shows you the difference between people in a car, what space they take up in cycling, and what space they take up on a bus. But I think the key message for us is, well, actually, what about train travel? Not just for getting to and from school and work, but also for leisure. So if there's one thing that Community Rail Network could do is commission a different graphic, and let's have a train in there as well, so that we can all use that, because I think that's a really positive message that we can take forward. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Fiona. That was really, really interesting, and lots of incredibly pertinent points coming through there for us to think about in terms of working with schools, tapping into the huge amount of focus around active and sustainable travel at the moment. Right, so we're overrunning a little bit. If we've got anyone who wants to give any thoughts, ask any questions at this point, please do raise your hands. We're happy to take a couple of quick bits of input. If let's see anyone with their hands up. We've had a couple of comments in the chat box, which I was going to. A couple of things about the sound. Apologies, I think there was a bit of an issue with the sound coming in and out there. Comments about we need to remember that schools are not closed, and we've got a lot of schools going back, of course, in the coming few weeks. So particularly important for us to be thinking about working with schools and what they need as they go back in September. Don't know if anyone's got any thoughts, or Fiona, if you want to come in on that, if there's anything in particular that you think members might be doing over the coming few weeks in the run up to schools going back.
It's just checking really the pinch points, because what are the queuing arrangements, what are the timetabling arrangements? Some schools are going back completely full time. Others are going back as a sort of staggered timetable. So it's just making sure that the two groups are talking to each other about this. And it varies from school to school, because we've got academies, we've got religious schools, we've got all sorts of schools, and they all have their different governance. But it's just making sure that local knowledge and getting it on the agenda.
Jules, we have a question as well, a general question from Roy Brown. Shall I allow him to talk?
Yes, please. Yeah, if he wishes to. Yeah, that would be great.
Roy, you should be able to ask your question live now. Are you there?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right, sorry, I was eating my sandwich when you called me. I was really just wondering how we get people to use trains, assuming we should be asking them to do so when the perceived risk is higher on a shared train rather than in a car in your own environment.
Yeah, I think interesting. But Fiona, do you want to give a view on that?
Again, I mean, it's how do you measure it is the question. Yes, if you're able to stay within your bubble and get to school by using car transport, then that does make a difference. But the minute you open the car and head towards school, then that advantage diminishes. For a lot of people, that's simply not an option. So, you know, there are there are transport arrangements already in place, and it's how to make them as safe as possible for those that can use them. It's the variety is what we need, including the active transport ones.
I guess there's also a lot that we can do within Community Rail to get across all of the work that's been put in by our rail partners to make rail travel as safe and as clean as it possibly can be. And as Pete Wilkinson emphasised in his video at the start, you know, so much has gone into making sure that passengers are well looked after. I think if they do use rail. But I guess on top of that, there's all these wider factors that haven't gone away around the long-term health risks to children of being ferried back and forth to school and other places rather than being able to use active travel for at least part of their journey. There's the air pollution health risks as well, and we know that air pollution is something that actually exacerbates the COVID situation. So road crashes as well is another factor, and we know that you're far safer, of course, in a train than you are in a car. So I think it is important for us to bear in mind these longer term factors, these longer term risks that haven't gone away. But certainly, the bigger question about how do we encourage sustainable transport behaviours and habits? Well, I think that, the work that we're doing to ask communities what they need, to work with them to overcome barriers, that's got to be the most important thing. So keep doing what we're doing. Okay.
There's a comment in the chat box, Jules, and there's a comment in the Q&A. Can I just ask all attendees and participants, please, if you'll put everything into the chat function and stay away from the Q&A, just so we can just monitor one thread, please? That would be great.
We're only looking at one box. I'm thinking we need to move on to the next topic now anyway, Hazel, so we don't fall too far behind. But as I said, we will continue to look at what is in the chat box and the Q&A and see if we can pick up on some of those points a bit later. Okay. So moving on to our next topic. So we're now going to focus in on social inclusion, well-being, and community resilience. And I'm really pleased to hand you over now to Hannah Fitzpatrick, who's Deputy Director, Passenger Experience Policy at the Department for Transport, and who I know that many of you will know already. Needs no introduction. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you, Jules, and hello everybody. It's not being able to see you, but I can picture you all out there and hope you're all keeping well. I don't have any slides, so I was just going to share a few thoughts on inclusion and community resilience from a DFT perspective and in the context of the Community Rail Development Strategy, which I appreciate isn't top of everyone's list at the moment, but is kind of hasn't gone away, and I think it's important that we keep it in mind. Pete Wilkinson beat me to it with his video and his very clear message in there about the department's ongoing support for Community Rail, which continues as strong as ever. So I'm not going to say too much about that and about our reliance on you all to keep fighting the good fight to make a difference for your communities and for the railways. We've all in DFT and I think across the country been head down in COVID response activity. So whenever I've been able to initiatives that sprung up in response to COVID, I know I've been involved in local food banks, for example, and also been part of other wider efforts to help people through this period. And I think the real positive from that is the new relationships that have been established as a result. So whether that's strengthening the ties that were already there, which Richard referred to earlier, or building new ties with groups and with individuals who've never come across Community Rail before, potentially never come across the railways before, which I think is one of the themes that I'm hearing throughout today's webinar. The challenge now, and I think it's one that Community Rail will definitely rise to meet, because you're great at it, is building on relationships to turn them into long-lasting ones that are going to deliver real, tangible benefits for all of our communities, which for me means now is the best time to think about social inclusion. Even if it might feel like a distraction, it's not. I think when we've talked about diversity and inclusion over the last couple of years in relation generally to the Community Rail Development Strategy, but at kind of various events we've all been at together, one of the challenges that I've heard time and time again has been around the difficulty of finding people and finding routes into diverse groups who don't know about the Community Rail. And I think your 5 months now with food banks and with those local support initiatives has really helped with that challenge and opened up new doors that wouldn't have been opened up otherwise. So you're working with faith groups and with local charities and with a whole range of people, individuals that you didn't come across before. And so I think that's what we need to see the opportunity to build on. Fiona mentioned as well that there's more and more happening online, and I think that's true in every part of all of our lives. And that again opens up a greater world of opportunities to make contact with new people and with a kind of more diverse group. I know Robert and Julia are going to be talking in the next session about building connections. I think in relation to that, my ask and the department's ask is that when you're thinking about making those connections, you think as broadly as possible about who it is you're connecting with, to reach out as far and wide across your community as you can, to people you've met, people you've heard about. For me, the strength of Community Rail is always its localness and the recognition that they're across the board, that one size doesn't fit all. And I think it feels more important than ever now that to help our local areas build their resilience, our activities in Community Rail reflect our communities in their very individual circumstances. I think there are some enormous common challenges across the country at the moment that we're all experiencing. But I do think that they manifest in slightly different ways for each community as well. So if your area is dependent on tourism, for example, that's a different challenge to overcome to if you're in a town centre where the commuters that bring the town centre to life and sustain it are working from home and staying away. And I think in a very practical way, as we see more and more local lockdowns happening, we're going to need resilience in different ways and at different times. So there's a particular challenge that part of Wales, spanning England and Wales, are already experiencing, which you might hear more about from Lisa next. But I think all that points to the fact that we need to be really responsive to the circumstances of our community to help them build their resilience, using the local partnerships we've built and are continuing to build over the last few months. I'm really keen as ever to hear from you all about that. So if there is a chance at the end of this mini session, it'd be great to hear from you directly about what ideas you've got, about any suggestions and things that you are planning or have been doing to build on those relationships. One final point from me before I stop. I absolutely second everything Jools said earlier about the challenges that Community Rail has been facing and the difficult situation. But I think it's also worth us recognising what a fortunate position we're in lots of ways, largely because we're all still here and we've got how many, up to 80 people joining in a call like this. Lots of local groups haven't made it through the COVID crisis and others are really struggling. So I think being here, surviving, has been a real achievement in itself and shows the resilience that we have as a community. So I think the challenge now that the department would set is that we use that to maximum advantage to support our communities and help them build their resilience as well. So that's it from me, and now for the good bit where you actually get to hear firsthand about what your colleagues have been doing. So I'm going to hand over to Lisa Dennison, who's the Development Manager at the Heart of Wales line, to hear about what the Heart of Wales have been doing. Lisa, over to you.
Hi everybody, I think you can see me, I think you can hear me, but like all the other presenters, it feels slightly strange that someone's smiling, so I assume that that you can hear me. So yes, I'm Lisa, I'm from the Heart of Wales line in Wales, and I've got 5 minutes just to quickly talk to you about a small grant funding programme that we put together to support our local communities along the Heart of Wales line during lockdown. Very, very briefly, for those of you who don't know us, we are a rural line, pretty much, very much focused on tourism rather than commuting. It's a 121-mile long line, and it starts in the north in Shrewsbury in England, travels through 3 more counties, all the way down to southwest Wales in Swansea. And there's a little map on the screen there that you can see that shows that, also shows our walking trail. We've got a 140-mile long distance walking trail that goes between stations. 34 stops, really small towns, little spa towns along the way, and mainly rural halts. So we have a station at each end, one in the middle that has a ticketing agency, and other than that, it's mainly flag down your train on a rural platform. So that kind of gives you a picture maybe of the communities that we're working with. And like many of you, really, it's about just aware that there's a huge amount of work going on by communities supporting isolated and vulnerable people, and really the challenge for us is about trying to connect with those organisations who are supporting people who need that the most. So I will talk to you a little bit about the fund. Basically, we did this because we wanted to utilise our resources to support the communities along the line at a time when, you know, we're having during lockdown, we had 1 train a day each way. Now we've got 2. So a very, very minimal service. And the message in Wales is very much essential travel only, and still is. And, you know, we weren't able to get out and do very much to support our communities. So we felt that we wanted to utilise and connect with our communities in a new way, and we've never been a funder before, but we felt that being a funder was probably the most practical thing that we could do. The first thing we did was contact our 4 voluntary sector bodies in the 4 counties along the line, and asked them about the gaps in funding. I was aware, and they confirmed really, that there was a lot of funding around for COVID-19. And that area in a way was quite well served, but the consensus was amongst the organisations that a flexible fund to support long-term resilience was needed. I called it the boring stuff really, and just filling the gaps, because sometimes funders do like to see new things and innovative things, whereas we wanted to fill the gaps. So it could be something like paying a utilities bill, or paying the rent, or plugging a gap where, you know, maybe they would have been fundraising in the past and weren't able to. So really just keeping it very flexible and saying, you know, what is it you need that's going to help you ride the storm and come out the other side, because you know, like all community organisations, they do incredible work on sort of very little a lot of the time, but we felt that particularly for smaller organisations, some of them could just disappear under the radar without people noticing, and you know, we really wanted to make sure that didn't happen because of the work they've been doing over lockdown. So because of that, we felt that small funds would be more useful and maybe encourage more groups to apply. Sometimes big funding bots can be pretty intimidating, so we opted for £500 limit, and obviously the communities need to be within certain radius of our stations, so within 10 kilometres of the station. So that was the kind of main criteria. In terms of delivery, we didn't mess around really. It took us 6 weeks to think of it before we launched. So we launched the fund on the 10th of July. We put 5,000 of our own funding in, and we were very grateful to receive match funding from Transport for Wales from their grant funding pot. So in total, we've got a £10,000 pot to give away. The other really important thing that we did was we organised with PAVO, who are the CVS for Powys, to administer the fund for us for a 5% fee, which is pretty small, and in terms of what they're delivering, I think offers very, very good value. And they've got the expertise in this, so why work hard if they can do it for you? So they coordinate responses, they're putting the grant panel together, they're doing all the due diligence checks, payments, evaluation. We're getting a lot back from them for the money, but we are working very much hand in hand with them. We've developed all the paperwork jointly. The grant panel is made up of a combination of their sort of funding experts as well as our board members, and we've got that meeting coming up in September, early September. We did all the usual promotion, press releases, etc. And so far we've had applications in, and there's been a nice spread along the line. So we're expecting a large rush at the end. I've been told that pretty much everyone, the majority will get their funding applications in at the last minute, but we do expect to spend all the money. Just my final slide now. This is, I guess, just talking about what we hope will be so our anticipated impact, because obviously we haven't finished the funding yet. But we hope that sorry, I've just realised that my face is covering up my notes, so that's it. We hope to have a good spread along the line of applications, and we see this as a really nice way, a really neat way of making connections between our counties and communities. We're not just going to leave it at this. We'll have, as Hannah was saying earlier, we'll have developed a whole new set of connections with organisations that we might never have heard of or come into contact with if we didn't have this funding. So we hope that it will deepen our connections into communities and give us a much greater understanding, because we'll get to read all of those applications, and we'll really hopefully get under the skin of what's been going on in communities in some shape or form. But on the opposite of that, we hope that it will improve communities' understanding of what we do, because I think a lot of people have not anticipated that we would be funders and could fund organisations. And again, it just opens that dialogue in a different way. We have been asked if we'll continue to do this, and we don't know if we will, but I think it's useful to have as part of our toolkit in the future. COVID isn't going away, so this might be something that we do on a short-term basis. It just depends on the evaluation that we'll do at the end. Do we really feel that we strengthen communities in the right way? What have we learnt? That's yet to come. So I'll happily circulate that report after the events. That will be done in April once all the projects have been delivered. So we're hoping that all the delivery will happen this financial year, and we'll be able to wrap that up in a report in April. I'm more than happy to share any learning or any of this with people. I'll provide my contact details. So that's it from me. Obviously, being in Wales, I do need to say diolch yn fawr to everyone. Thank you for having me and for listening. And I'm now going to hand back to Jools, I believe. So yes, thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was really interesting, and thank you to Hannah Fitzpatrick. I think two really useful sets of insights there on how we can be responsive to what communities need right now, deepen our local links, and as Lisa says, I think that benefits Community Rail as well. It makes us stronger and better known and better understood. Does anyone want to put up their hands, other than my colleague Brian, to to make a comment or ask a question? Because if nobody else puts their hand up, I am going to have to go to Brian.
We have got a comment, Jools.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
Actually, It's actually something for Lisa. It's from Sue and Dave, which I think is Dave Carlisle from Friends of Buxton Station. And he says, can Lisa give the best example of how £500 has really helped?
Well, not at the moment. You know, the fund is still open, and it closes in a couple of weeks. And I'm being good, and I'm not peeking at the applications as they come in, because that, I think, you know, might not be very fair. But you know, yeah, I will have to come back to you on that. But from a previous life where I actually worked as a funder, you know, small amounts just can do incredible things. I think it doesn't sound like very much, but I think for really tiny groups, particularly maybe those groups that have sprung up because of COVID, just to supply face masks or whatever it is, they might suddenly have a renewed or a new energy for doing something interesting. And if we can help retain some of that energy that people have put into delivering support during COVID, then I think that will be a great result, even if it's just, you know, establishing a new group would be fantastic.
Thank you. Jules, there is also Catherine Huddleston has put a comment in the chat. It might be nice to ask her to comment live.
Catherine, do you want to make a comment? Because I think you might have put that comment in during the last session, but so entirely up to you.
Yes, just the comment I made was how with local lockdowns and county to county variance on guidance for things, as a line that covers 3 counties, trying to get concise, clear information across the variety of to suit the variety of scenarios is a challenge, I think, and I think it'll be one that's reflected across the country at the moment.
Yeah, I think, as I acknowledged briefly at the start, I think it's an incredibly complicated picture at the moment, and perhaps hence having those really strong local links with local authorities, others in the community and voluntary sector, service providers, businesses, and of course partners, is so important for us, attempting to map out those different local nuances and respond effectively to them. I don't know if any of our other panelists want to comment on that.
It's Hannah. I don't think this is a particularly helpful response, Catherine, but I think we all recognise that it is a real challenge, and like Jules said, it's kind of, I think at the moment, changing slightly day to day. So one of the areas my team is responsible for is refunds, and understanding the implications of different rules around travel restrictions for refunds as the lockdowns are going along is proving difficult, because a Greater Manchester lockdown looks entirely different to an Aberdeen lockdown, is what we're learning. So I would agree with Jules that the important thing is kind of building those local links, because it should be the local authorities who have the best information about what's happening on the ground, and I hope that there will be, as we become more familiar with this happening, we'll also be able to put better communications out from central government around this. But I think it is always going to be at a local level, and yeah, having a line that crosses 3 counties is incredibly difficult. So just to say that we do feel your pain on that one.
And I guess before we move on to the next topic, two other points that I think have been raised in that discussion, which speak to that issue of how do we manage these localized differences. I think a couple of people have mentioned the importance of being kind of nimble and you know, literally responding quite quickly if needed to changes as they happen. I think the point Hannah was just making about, I think things are obviously changing quickly at the moment. It makes it difficult, makes it doubly important for us to respond, and also to seize opportunities when they come along. And I think Lisa used the phrase, you know, we didn't hang about with this, you know, we had to get on with it. So I guess there's perhaps a bit of that. And the other point which Lisa mentioned, which I just wanted to reiterate, because I thought it was really interesting how closely Heart of Wales are working with local voluntary associations and that just seems to me to be a really useful partnership that Community Rail can forge and make good use of. You know, if you're not using those links already. Okay, I think if we're all right to move on, we will now hand over to Robert Nisbet from Rail Delivery Group, who's going to kick things off in our discussion on positivity and promotion.
Okay, can you hear me now? I think I'm off mute. I am. Fantastic. How wonderful to start off talking about a topic with positivity in the title, because, you know, I've been in the rail industry I'm a mere newbie. I've been in it for about 3 years, and I act really as the broadcast spokesperson for the rail industry, for the train operating companies and for Network Rail as well. I started a couple of weeks actually before the May 2018 timetable. So I can hear sighs and groans all around in front of laptops. You can imagine what my introduction to being the spokesperson for the rail industry was when the 2018 timetable happened. Let's say happened. But since then, it has been quite a roller coaster, and obviously COVID is, for me and for my experience and for all of us here, the next. But I think the way that we're trying to look at it at the Rail Delivery Group is that this is a moment of reappraisal and opportunity. So I know the phrase "build back better" is being used a lot, but there are some practical examples of that. That yes, okay, I appreciate that numbers of users fell by 95% during lockdown. Of course they did, because people were told to stay in their homes. But we were still running a service, and we were running a service for key workers to make sure that fuel got to power stations, the supermarket shelves were stacked, and our punctuality was the best we've ever seen. I mean, it was 97, 98%. And what we've done when we looked at how we stripped back the timetable, and now we're beginning to build that timetable back up, and we'll be going to close to the number of services we had before COVID, is to learn lessons from that period. And perhaps that not always more services are better, that actually maybe having fewer services with longer trains, for example, or just being clever about where you take some services out to enable things to move more smoothly could be an example of that. But I also think one of the biggest problems that we are facing at the moment, and again, we have to see this as an opportunity, is that the avoid public transport message was so successful that we are still seeing a limited return. I noticed in the chat someone put the new DFT figures. We're now looking at about 31%, I think, on average of pre-COVID levels of users. And we have space for 50%, even with social distancing. So there is capacity that isn't being used. And come September, uplift, and then come December, when we add even more services on, how do we set about trying to get people back onto the railways? And there have been some really interesting elements of the discussion so far in this webinar. We're talking to Sir David Spiegelhalter, the eminent public health expert, but also he's a behavioral science expert, looking at how we get the messaging right to reach those people who are frankly scared or frightened about getting on trains because they think that they will be at danger from it. But there's one really interesting statistic on the subject of positivity, Jools, I'm sticking to my brief, that we saw from the Transport Focus figures recently, was that 85% of people using trains at the moment say they feel safe. 60% of people who are not getting on trains, and a lot of them would never get on a train anyway, are saying that they think they're not safe. So when you get and tackle that perception element, that is what we have to do, and we're looking at various ways of doing it. And I'm going to come to a series of asks in a bit from you, because we really need your help to get that message across. Because I think the biggest challenge operationally now for us is to move from this travel demand management to kind of reassurance. So We have at the moment this Instilling Confidence plan called the Safer Travel Pledge. And I'm sure many of you will have heard maybe me talk about it on radio and television, but seen with your local partners or even experienced it yourself looking at all the posters and stations. What we're doing, a guarantee that stations and trains are cleaner, that we're making it easier to maintain hygiene, so more hand dispensers for sanitizers, for hand sanitizer, for example. But also we're asking people to help us as well. We're saying that this is, we'll make the journey safer if you do your bit. So please wear a mask and maintain social distance where possible and avoid busier times. So we're getting that message out across as well. But again, let's go back to opportunity here and be positive. That actually now the government has the revenue risk. So I'm sure many of you are well aware that the train operating companies are operating under management contracts, concession contracts at the moment. The government is taking all the revenue in, and we are, as a train operators, getting a 2% fee to manage those services, a fairly standard concession agreement. But now the Treasury are seeing what they can do now that their hands are on the levers. And we're saying, please reform the fare system. Please reform fares regulation, because it is keeping many of these products that may look extremely out of date. Season tickets. Already use was declining before COVID. We're expecting it potentially to fall through the floor as people adopt hybrid working patterns. We need to have flexible season tickets or carnets. So those kind of conversations are going on, obviously, between us and government at the very highest level. How can we, kind of build back better? And we think fundamental reform of the railway, which we've been talking about for a long time, not having one size all franchise agreements and not replacing them with another one size fits all either, because as you all know, train operators have got different markets all over the country, and it needs to be adaptable and agile. So those are the opportunities for us as an industry talking to government. To reassure people, to push for fares reform, and to get that reassurance message across. But we're under no illusion that this is going to be tough. There was an article, I think it was in the New York Times, that was talking about how people view the car as the ultimate form of PPE. And we have to find ways to get over that, because the environmental damage caused by if everybody goes back onto cars, as well as just the sheer horrendousness of the morning commute in your car, is enormous. So, in terms of, kind of what we want you to do for us is to work with your local partners to build back confidence in rural areas that travel is safe. Young people, we've heard it mentioned in the context of schools, but also I think teenagers, young adults as well. What's bizarre is that they're probably the least affected by the pandemic in terms of their health, but they may well be the most affected in terms of the outside world, in terms of job opportunities, volunteering schemes, things like that. How can we engage those young people with the railway, if they're having difficulty finding jobs generally across the piece after COVID? Integrated sustainable journeys, the conversation has already been there before, but the environmental benefits that rail brings must be linked up to walking and cycling. And it was inspiring just to hear Lisa remind us of the Welsh line and that little walking track that goes on, well, very long, not little, that goes alongside the track as well. How can we bind that in more? And also just this basic positivity. Back to that to finish with, Jools. I spend a lot of my time doing what Boris Johnson calls whack-a-mole, which is that game, where you see one press report about something awful that's happened on the railway, and I go and say, well, that's an isolated example, look at the overall statistics, etc. We have to keep an eye out in our local newspapers, our local, if there are some in your area, local radio, local TV. If you're seeing negative stories about rail, help us to try to reverse them. We need to get the positive stories out there as well. I came up with an initiative, which I know people call, CSR, about how we can improve our reputation, which is working with food banks, and I know many of you do, but in the main train stations around the country as well, with the local food banks, as part of a stockpile amnesty. So for people who may have bought all of those packets of rice and all the rest of it and now want to give them up, you know, we're looking at ways of allowing commuters or leisure travellers to come and give them to us and volunteers of the Trussell Trust at stations. So things like that. So those are our 4 kind of asks of you. But please, I know you talk to your local partners, have those conversations, because Build Back Better shouldn't just become a meaningless slogan. We can really do it in the railways, I think. And now that's me. I know when a little over my time. I'm sure you'd expect nothing more from someone who does quite a lot of radio TV for a living, but I'm going to hand to Julia now, Julia Singleton-Tasker, who's the Community Rail Officer at the Heart of England CRP, who's also going to be talking about positivity. Julia.
Thanks, Robert. I've got to say already from the other speakers, my brain is already fizzing with all the ideas of more things that we could do within CRP area. So I think just having this webinar is a great example of positivity within the industry and within community rail. It really shows the sort of the spirit and the support that we give each other as well. So yeah, my brain's already sort of somewhere else planning all sorts of different things. When I was asked to speak about promotion and positivity and my experiences of them, it was actually fairly easy because that's what we do as community rail officers. We look for the positive opportunities, we look for the ways to promote our local communities. It doesn't mean to say that we don't tackle serious issues and we don't discuss serious topics, but when we do, we try and find solutions to them. So it's not just kind of saying, isn't this awful? It's going, isn't this awful? Right, what can we do about it as a community? And I think that's the really lovely thing about the roles that we are in, is that we have the opportunity to do that and to link up people to do that. Just to give a brief background on the Heart of England CRP. So the Heart of England CRP is made up of 11 funding partners, and I cover 36 stations over 3 lines. So it's a fairly large area. And I cover sort of inner city stations such as Coventry, down to the more rural stations on the Shakespeare line near Stratford-upon-Avon. So there's a real diverse mix of communities and populations. I was in, if I can think of a positive angle to COVID-19, when COVID-19 kicked off and lockdown started, I was in the fortunate position that I had no events planned because I'd only started my job at the beginning of January. So I didn't have to cancel anything, I didn't have to change anything. I was only just starting to plan what I was going to do. So I thought to keep myself entertained, I would build a website because that's what you do when you've got time in your hands. Before lockdown, we had quotes from web designers, but like I said, I thought, why not try and do it myself? So the very first thing I did was research, and Google was really my friend here. I tried to research everything and put it all in a lovely PowerPoint presentation, so I had the content ready to go for when I figured out how to use Wix, which took me a while, but I appreciated the time when I wasn't commuting to actually have a play about on Wix and really sort of work on what the content I wanted and how it's going to be presented on the website. Content-wise, I started to build up a database, and I'm continuously adding to it as well. I focused on 4 main groups, which were schools, community groups, local attractions, and local businesses. Because I have got such a wide area to cover, and also I am relatively new to the Midlands as well, so this was a voyage of discovery for myself as well as for the CRP. What I wanted to do was collate all the information so that when lockdown finished and when people were starting to go out and about again, I was able to I would be able to signpost them to actually what is happening around their local stations. You know, where can they get to using their local lines, thinking about local tourism. So it's planning post-COVID, but using the time during the lockdown to be able to do that properly. And it also enabled me as well to research the local businesses. I didn't want to focus on the big independent retailers. I wanted to focus on the local businesses who actually might also be offering services during the COVID lockdown as well. So this is our homepage, and if you have a look on the side here, we have got the local businesses, a local business support link. And what I've done on there, I've just linked for the local businesses. There are a few areas where they can go to for support and advice on particular funding and also coronavirus advice. but there's also links on each of the station pages where I've put links to the local businesses that have remained opening throughout COVID, and also what services they offer. So people can come there and use it as a centre point for information, and it's creating a positive association with the train industry, with the Community Rail Partnership, but without sort of encouraging people to use trains. It's just kind of getting that association in their heads that actually we're still looking towards the community side of things, not just the rail side of things as well. Also for me, the website is as much about promoting the volunteer activities, and each of the station adoption groups and the rail user groups have their own page on the website. And I've basically said to them, that page is for them. They can send me the information, they can send me the photos, and I will upload it for them. But that's really for them to promote what they're doing and the positive things that they are doing. And they've been encouraged to send in photos and stories and any sorts of things that they want to be added to that page. That's for them, so they can take ownership. It also helps in terms of promotion for the CRP, because they can then signpost our website on their various social media outlets as well. So it's kind of creating that that flow of traffic between the two areas. So 3 weeks into lockdown, I had most of the content I needed for the website, so I thought I was flying with this. I'd built it all using Wix, it was all good to go, and then I was told, you can't build a website on Wix because you're a Warwickshire County Council employee and you have to have the website built by their team, which, as you can imagine, at the time was rather frustrating. To cut a long story short, the website was finally up and running by the 29th of June. So it took a little bit of time, but actually I'm pleased that I had the chance. And again, thinking about this positivity in the face of quite an awful situation, I'm really pleased it gave me the chance to research my area, research my stations, go and Google, you know, just have a look around, type in schools, type in community groups, follow the links and find out everything that you can about the local areas, because that will really help to build a good sort of network to build onto and a good foundation for when, you know, things start to be a bit more mobile and people start to move around a little bit, and for when we want to get people back onto trains and sort of really actively encouraging that train travel again. In terms of, oh, sorry, this is just the resources website as well. I also put resources on for parents and teachers and guardians, just linking into not just rail kind of resources for people to use, but also again thinking about the local, like the Stratford Literary Festival. They had some really good videos and stories by authors that people could link into. So again, it's just promoting what's happening locally to support people who have to stay at home. And there's the local business and services sort of page as well, slightly out of order, sorry. Thinking about social media, we've got a Twitter account and we've got an Instagram account. I'm brand new to Twitter, so I've been muddling my way through that. In all honesty, Twitter seems to be the best platform social media wise for the Community Rail Partnership. That's just from my experience. And I have more followers and following more people on that than Instagram. I don't know if that will change, but for the moment that's the way it is. And again, I've tried to build up that positive association with the rail industry, with the Community Rail Partnership, even if it's not a directly obvious rail thing that I'm tweeting about. So I focused on a couple of different areas. The first one is sort of the everyday rail tweets. So that's things like station visits that I've done. So when I first went to my first station after 3 months, I put that on Twitter. Promoting volunteer activity. So even during lockdown, we had some volunteers. This is at a Nuneaton station, and they repurposed this luggage trolley. They put the luggage case into it, they replanted it. They also built a flower planter shaped like a train. So I wanted to celebrate the things that people were still doing, even though they couldn't actively go to the station themselves. And I also wanted to encourage our other station adoption groups to do the same thing, to think, right, well, we can't go to the station, but what can we do now to help us for when we can go back? And I also use it to share good news stories. So we did a thing called Welcome Backpacks for all our volunteers just as they were starting to return. And I used local businesses and charities all gave items, or sort of I paid for items to go into these welcome backpacks, and one was given to each volunteer. So the local businesses and charities were all promoted through our social media as well. So again, it's creating those links and showing how we're supporting what's going on around us. The second aspect on Twitter that I focus on is the technical aspect. So this is things like messages from the TOCs, safety and timetabling messages, and messages from Network Rail. I don't tend to focus too much on the side of the rail industry, as I think most people would tend to go directly to the TOC or the Network Rail websites. But it is good to be able to give people up-to-date information. I don't overly worry about keeping up to date on it on a daily basis, hour by hour, because otherwise it would take over my whole life, and I have other things that I need to do, like children and a dog and a husband and my normal job. But it is good just to kind of keep on top of those and just kind of go, right, actually, are there any delays in my area that I can tweet about, just to let people know about it. So the third area that I focus on in my Twitter is sort of community based. So I would say if there is a silver lining to COVID-19, it's the fact that the sense of community has really gone from strength to strength, not just in our industry, but generally you see everyday examples of people just doing amazing things within their local community groups. So new community groups are being formed, and I try and support them as much as possible through social media. And it's important to think about actually what roles can these groups have when the crisis calms down enough and we want to harness the positivity of the community spirit. So I'm already in touch with several of the community groups, and we're starting to talk actually what can their volunteers do in the future, and can they link up to the CRP. We've got this community spirit, we need to keep it, we need to sort of promote what they're doing to build upon the foundations for the future as well. So this is just an example. So there's a COVID-19 support group in Kenilworth, and they tweeted about an over 60s virtual singing workshop. Nothing to do with the rail industry, but it is to do with our community, and that's the thing. Focus on the community and not the rail aspects of our job at the moment, and that will help us in the future in the recovery from COVID-19. I've also
Julia, sorry, we're running a little short on time again. Do you mind?
Yep, I can wrap up
in the next minute.
Thank
you.
No problem. I was just going to say I've also been linking up to local events that have gone online this year, but again, I've opened up, it's allowed me to open up this discussion with them to think about next year. So we're supporting them now, again, thinking towards the future. And also it's a great way to promote mental health services and signpost mental health services like the Kaleidoscope group. Again, just helping to support our local community. I'm going to finish up really quickly, and because 3-part slogans are all the rage at the moment, I thought I'd come up with my own, and I've got focus on community, go down the rabbit hole. So that means when you go onto Twitter, click on the people that you're following, see who they're following, see who else you can link with within your community. There's some real local gems. Take that time to follow those leads. It's not time wasting. And the last one is to stay positive. And with that, I will hand back to you. Thank you, Jules.
Thanks, Julia. That was brilliant, and thank you to Robert. I really like that idea of. I wasn't sure what you were going to say when you were talking about going down the rabbit hole, but I really like the idea of using social media to build connections. It's not just there for kind of broadcasting; it's there for building relationships. Absolutely, right. We're running a little short on time. Does anyone have any quick points, questions that they want to feed in? Verbally. If not, I'm going to pick up on a couple of things that have been mentioned in the chat box, but do feel free to put your hands up if you want to, any of our attendees want to say anything. So a couple of people have mentioned in the chat function about, as we acknowledged right at the start, different situations in different areas, in particular comments around the situation in Wales and Scotland being different in terms of the messaging around public transport use. Do any of our panellists, perhaps Robert in particular, have any thoughts on how community rail can handle that, where we're perhaps not able to kind of go all out in terms of promoting rail? We have to be a bit more restrained. What can we do still to build positivity and to show that the railway's still here and still cares?
It's very, very difficult with the different messaging. We, as you can imagine, as the kind of Great Britain wide trade body, are finding it very hard to make sure that the train operators have the right collateral in terms of posters and stickers, when in Wales it's still essential only. England is kind of the most permissive, and Scotland is somewhere in the middle. The TOC is entirely contained within the nation, then it's relatively easy. But when you've got like cross country that cuts cross country, it's very difficult, because you're taking a train that goes through different countries, nations, with different advice and different rules. So it is tough. One thing I could ask for your help, and this is, you know, at stations, if you see that the posters are looking out of date. So if you in England a station that has, you know, essential travel only, please alert the station manager, because we're under a lot of pressure from the government to make sure that we're up to date and we're giving the right information out. So if you spot any information that you know to be wrong, just because it's been forgotten in one part of a station or something, then please let the station manager know, because that helps us get a uniformity of message. So at least we're being kind of accurate.
Good point. Yeah, so I think there's things that Community Rail can do to perhaps aid consistency. Yeah, and as we said, to work with local partners and try and be in sync. But I think there are a few comments that you made, Robert, and from what Julia was saying about using other local community rail activities to get positive messages out there. I really liked what Julia was talking about to do with empowering local volunteers to promote what they're doing. I think that's a really great point. I'm just picking up on a few other comments in the chat box, which are around promoting use of rail to get to tourist locations, national parks, seaside places, where on the one hand there are concerns around, you know, huge numbers of people flooding to certain locations, and I think some local communities being worried about that. On the other hand, we want, where we can, to encourage people to use the train rather than to be driving. So I think there's I'm not sure there's an easy answer to that, but I don't know if anyone wants to come in on that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, in terms of that, I think a really good thing about the community rail partnerships is, yes, okay, you've got the obvious places that people can go to, but it's part of our role to promote actually the hidden gems along our lines and go, look, if you want to get out and escape, that's great, but don't go there because there's loads of other people. This is what else you can discover. This is how you can get out. This is how you can enjoy, you know, our countryside around us or our country around us. Use the train safely, and, you know, go and explore, go and discover new things. Yeah, great point. I know that Richard Birmingham has also posted in the chat function a link to some of the work that Devon and Cornwall have been doing around more nuanced tourism promotion. Richard, I don't know if you want to briefly flag that up in the 1 minute we've got left.
Yeah, very quickly, just to encourage people to have a look at our Facebook page at Great Scenic Railways, and you'll see some of the nuanced, as you say, nuanced promotion that we've been doing. The point about hotspots, we've got a particular hotspot in the far southwest, which is St Ives, and you've just got to keep a really close eye on things with the train operator. And Julia hit the nail on the head. We're promoting hidden gems as well. So work out what you can promote and promote that, and steer away from promoting the places which are already basically at capacity given social distancing.
I guess where that local knowledge becomes so incredibly
local knowledge, local links. Yeah.
Talking to people, finding out what's happening on the ground. Right. I honestly don't know where the last hour and a half has gone. It's sped by. Thank you to everyone for your comments in the chat function. We have seen those, we have noted them. We'll take them away and look at them afterwards. And I'm sorry if there's anyone that we didn't come to specifically. I think some really fantastic points, which just reiterating the need for us to have that local focus, is the phrase that Richard used right at the start. the great value in utilising our local links and building new ones. And you know, not the three themes that we've covered today, I think, you know, they're all interlinked, and we need to understand the relationships between you know, promoting social inclusion and well-being. That can also help us to build positivity, and of course talking to our partners and understanding what's happening locally is a foundation for everything that we're doing. So I'm going to wrap up there, conscious of the time. As I mentioned at the start, we'll close, when we close this down, the feedback form should pop up. We'd really like to hear your thoughts on what you've got from this session, if there are any elements that you'd like us to cover in the future, and if there are any points that you've not had a chance to make, you can do that in the feedback form as well. Huge thanks to all of you for joining us, and a massive thank you to our speakers for sharing their fantastic insights and examples. It was lovely to see you all and catch up with you all again, hopefully soon.